To start out, my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled "One Party's Selling a Big Lie, the Other Can't Sell the Truth." And here's the interesting thing about this. Political scientists have discovered, and this is kind of a revelation over the last couple of years, maybe the last couple of decades, that politicians, you know, it's always been politicians by and large follow public opinion, but that actually politicians can lead public opinion. In fact, very often lead public opinion. I think FDR was probably a good example of that, LBJ as well, Ronald Reagan too, for that matter. And the Republicans have been driving public opinion in a big way. The example that I think is most shocking is the one that the New York Times reported on. In 2008, only 6% of Americans said that, quote, or agreed with the statement, quote, "a woman's place is in the home." Today, 48% of Republican men and 37% of Republican women agree with that sentiment. Now, it's still around 6% for Democrats, but Republicans have shifted their worldview on the role of women in society. Almost half of Republican men and over a third of Republican women think that women should simply stay home. Their place is in the kitchen and in the bedroom. How did this come about? Well, because the Republican Party has been promoting this kind of twisted masculinity now for at least a decade and a half, and I think you could argue much longer. I mean, you know, just look at Donald Trump. He cheated on all three of his wives. Elon Musk has produced at least 14 children, 3 different children with 3 different women in 1 year. And this is viewed as, you know, by young men today as like these guys are their role models. And, you know, to put a cherry on the top, Trump just brought, what was it, Andrew Tate and his brother, a couple of rapists over from Europe, or alleged rapists, over from Europe, where they were being held in jail for, you know, with the rape or assault charges against them. So the Republican Party has been at the lead of this, and you see this, by the way, among, you know, their electeds, while easily a third, maybe as, you know, approaching a half of elected Democrats are women. I think it's a little more than a third. It's a small fraction of elected Republicans are women. And of the appointed Republicans, you look in the Trump administration, the women that he is putting in positions of power, like Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi, are women who have exaggerated their sexuality to appeal to men. I mean, it's this kind of woman's role type of woman. And, you know, that's just one example of how the GOP has, or Republican politicians have successfully altered American public opinion. Meanwhile, what are Democrats doing? Democrats have been having their consultants, you know, find out what public opinion is and then try to frame policies around public opinion. Well, public opinion is being shaped by Republicans, which is why the Democrats have been moving to the right, because they're chasing a public opinion that's being altered by the Republicans. And then you get this just wackadoodle stuff. You know, there was a retreat a couple weeks ago funded by Third Way. That's, you know, a remnant of Bill Clinton's 1990s neoliberalism. And one of their primary conclusions was that Democratic politicians need to move away from the left. This is a verbatim quote from their summary. Quote, "Reduced far-left influence and infrastructure by building a moderate Democratic infrastructure, including media, talent pipelines, and communications networks, push back against far-left staffers and groups that exert a disproportionate influence on policy and messaging, and ban far-left candidate questionnaires and refuse to participate in forums that create ideological purity tests." In other words, they're telling Democrats, stop talking about free health care, shut up about free college. No more, we don't want to hear any more talk about breaking up corporate monopolies or taxing the morbidly rich to make sure Social Security is solid. Forget about guaranteeing the right to vote or getting corporate and billionaire money out of politics. Instead, just rant about illegal aliens, trans women in sports, as Gavin Newsom commits political suicide, and suck up to young white men, especially the incels. And Republicans, on the other hand, have been pushing their point of view, and they have succeeded in convincing Americans that there are so many illegal immigrants voting, that we have to have draconian voting rules to make it much, much harder for people to vote, to stop the epidemic of fraud, which produces 5-10 people a year out of billions of ballots cast. They've convinced people of this. They've convinced people that the southern border is well, actually, it's even wilder than this. There was a study done between the final weeks of the 2024 election, the last election, and Election Day, November 5th. And in that election that we just had, the Democrats, Kamala Harris's campaign, by and large, did not offer any bold policy prescriptions, right? Hey, we'll help out first-time home buyers. That's nice. It's like throwing the dog a bone, but it's not major structural reform. She refused to campaign on ending student debt and on Medicare for all, on health care for all Americans, for example. She refused to campaign on voting rights across the United States. She refused to campaign on breaking up big corporations. She refused to campaign on raising taxes on billionaires. And so what happened was the Republicans instead started telling people campaigning on. And as a result of this, when they did this survey, they were asking people who were undecided voters who broke for Trump in the last 2 months of the election. Genuinely undecided voters. And 83% of these people who voted for Trump believed that Kamala Harris wanted to pay for transgender surgery for illegal immigrants, which has never been part of her policies. 82% believed that she wanted to require all cars to be electric within a decade. 77% were convinced she wanted to decriminalize border crossing. In other words, throw our borders wide open. 72% told pollsters that she was going to strip all funding from local police departments. Now, Kamala Harris never said any of these things, but Republicans repeatedly said she said these things. So here you've got Republicans leading and altering public opinion on things, like trans people, voting rights, immigrants and immigration, how bad crime was, how bad the economy was. I mean, they convinced people that crime and the economy were terrible, when in fact the crime statistics were better than they've been in 25 years, and the economy was better than it's been in 50 years. They literally convinced people that up is down and left is right. And they succeeded in doing it. And meanwhile, the Democrats are just like, well, because the Democrats are being told by their highly paid consultants, well, you don't want to offend the insurance companies. They donate a lot of money. So, don't call for Medicare for all. And you don't want to offend the big banks. They donate a lot of money. So don't call for single-family homes only being owned by people who live in them rather than by big banks and hedge funds and things. And in particular, don't talk about ending student debt, because the big banks make a fortune on that. I mean, it's 100% safe. It's totally subsidized by law and by the federal government, and they can charge 7 or 8% interest. Americans want change. They've wanted change. I think the Obama election was a demand for change. I think that this election, I think every one of these elections since 2008 has been a demand for change. And Americans have never gotten the progressive change that I believe they want. And the thing that tells me this is that Bernie Sanders can draw 34,000 people to a rally. Why? Because he tells the truth. He's not doing what the consultants tell him to do. He's not doing what the polls tell him to do. He's telling the friggin' truth.